The day I found it, I was standing in the bathroom at 6 a.m., half asleep, reaching for my toothbrush. My fingers brushed the side of my collarbone and stopped. There was something there, a small, firm ridge just beneath the skin, sitting at the base of my throat on the left side. I pressed it again. It didn't move. It didn't hurt. It just existed, quietly, like it had always been there, and I had simply never noticed. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The light above the sink hummed. The house was still. I told myself it was probably nothing. A swollen lymph node, a muscle knot, something my body had built and would quietly dismantle on its own. I got dressed, went to work, and tried not to think about it. That lasted 3 days. By the 4th morning, I was pressing it again before I even got out of bed. It hadn't changed. It was still there, still firm, still silent. I had just turned 26. I had a desk job at a property management company in Columbus, Ohio, a car with a cracked taillight I kept meaning to fix, and a 1-bedroom apartment I shared expenses on with my younger sister. I was not, by any measure, someone who had time to be sick. But the lump had other plans. I told my mother first. We were on the phone that Sunday, our usual check-in call, the kind where she asked about groceries and I asked about her garden, and I mentioned it the way you mention a strange dream. Casually, like it didn't already have weight. She was quiet for a second, then she said, "You've always been dramatic, sweetheart." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. "Mom, I'm not being dramatic. There's actually something there." "It's probably a cyst," she said. "I had one on my wrist for years, completely harmless. You Google too much, that's your problem." I didn't push it. My mother had a particular way of ending conversations she found inconvenient. Not with anger, but with certainty. She spoke about things she didn't want to be true as though her not believing them was enough to make them go away. I had grown up in that house. I knew better than to argue. My father was worse. When I brought it up 2 days later, during a dinner at my parents' house in Westerville, he looked at me across the table with the same flat expression he reserved for bad weather forecasts and minor car troubles. "You're 26, he said. "Young, healthy. Stop looking for problems." "I'm not looking for anything. I found something." "Have some more chicken," my mother said. That was how it went. Not with cruelty. My parents were not cruel people, not openly, but with a kind of practiced dismissal that I had spent my whole life mistaking for reassurance. They were not worried, and so they decided I should not be either. Problem solved. Pass the chicken. I made a doctor's appointment anyway. My general practitioner was a quiet woman named Dr. Okafor, who had been my doctor since I moved to Columbus 4 years earlier. She examined the lump in under 2 minutes, pressed around it twice, and then sat back and looked at me with an expression that made the air in the room feel different. "How long has this been here?" she asked. "I noticed it about 2 weeks ago. Could be longer." She typed something into her computer. "I want to send you for an ultrasound. Possibly a biopsy, depending on what that shows. I'd like to get this looked at sooner rather than later." "Is it?" I started. "I don't want to speculate," she said carefully, "but I don't want to wait either." I drove home with a referral paper on the passenger seat and called my mother from the parking garage. I told her what Dr. Okafor said. I told her about the ultrasound, about the biopsy possibility, about the words sooner rather than later. My mother was quiet again. Longer this time. Then she said, "I really think you need to calm down. Doctors order tests for everything. It's how they make money. Mom, your father and I have been talking. We think you're under a lot of stress at work. That can manifest physically. You know that." Dr. Okafor didn't say anything about stress. She said she wants to run tests. Well? A pause. "We'll see." I did not know what "we'll see" meant until 3 days later when I called the imaging center to confirm my appointment and was told it had been canceled. I asked by whom. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The woman finally said, "The cancellation request came through your insurance account." I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building for 15 minutes after that call. My hands were in my lap. I could not quite make sense of what I had just heard. I was 26 years old. I had my own apartment. I filed my own taxes. I had been doing my own laundry since I was 13. And somehow, because I was still on my parents' insurance plan, because transitioning off their plan had always been one of those things I'd kept pushing to next quarter, next month, next year. My mother had called an imaging center and canceled the doctor's appointment that was not hers to cancel. I called her immediately. "We talked about it," she said before I could finish my sentence. "Your father and I both agree this is getting out of hand. You're spiraling. This is anxiety, not a medical issue. You canceled my appointment. We're trying to help you. How is that helping me?" "Because," she said, and her voice shifted into the tone she used when she considered a conversation over, "if we let you keep chasing this, you're going to convince yourself something is wrong when nothing is wrong, and we're not going to pay for that." I heard my father in the background say something I couldn't make out. My mother said, "We love you," and hung up. I want to be fair here, because I have had a long time to think about this. My parents are not monsters. They're people who grew up believing that illness was something that happened to other families, that worrying about your health was a form of weakness, that doctors were for emergencies and broken bones and not for things you found by accident in a bathroom mirror. They came from a world where you pushed through, where you didn't make a fuss, where a lump that didn't hurt was probably nothing and probably was not worth the copay. But I was standing in a parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, and I had a lump at the base of my throat that my doctor wanted to biopsy, and my mother had just canceled my imaging appointment from the comfort of her kitchen in Westerville, and I did not have the luxury of their certainty. I went back to Dr. Okafor the next morning and explained what had happened. She listened with her hands folded on her desk and her expression carefully neutral. When I finished, she said, "You are an adult. You have the right to authorize your own medical care. The issue is the insurance. What do I do?" She referred me to a patient advocate at the hospital affiliated with her practice. The advocate, a woman named Brenda who had short silver hair and the energy of someone who had heard every version of this story, walked me through my options in under 20 minutes. I could file a formal complaint with the insurance provider. I could apply for a sliding scale payment plan through the hospital. I could look into Ohio's patient rights protections. She printed out 3 pages of information, handed them to me across her desk, and said, "You are not the first person to sit in that chair." I was grateful. I was also terrified because the sliding scale plan meant costs I was not sure I could cover on my salary alone, and the insurance complaint process was going to take time I was not sure I had. I started a spreadsheet that night: income, expenses, what I could cut. I transferred money from my emergency fund. I called the imaging center back and rescheduled under my own name with my own payment arrangement and did not tell my parents. The ultrasound was on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I went alone. The technician was professional and quiet, and I stared at the ceiling tiles for 40 minutes while she moved the wand across my neck. She didn't tell me anything. They never do. I drove home and made pasta and watched 2 episodes of a show I cannot remember, and went to bed and lay awake until 2 a.m. Dr. Okafor called me the next afternoon. "The ultrasound identified a solid mass," she said. "The characteristics are concerning enough that I want to move forward with a fine needle aspiration biopsy. I've already submitted the referral to the specialist." "Concerning," I repeated. "I want to get you answers," she said. "That's the next step. Getting you answers." I called my sister that night. She was 23 and in grad school in Cincinnati, and she was the only person in my family I trusted completely. I told her everything: the lump, the appointment, the cancellation, the ultrasound, the word concerning. She was quiet in the way that meant she was thinking, not dismissing. "Does Mom know about the ultrasound?" she asked. "No. Are you going to tell her?" "I don't know yet." "Don't," she said quietly. "Not until you have the results. You know what she'll do." I knew. I had always known. In that particular way, you know things about your family that you've never said out loud. The shape of their fear. The specific way it turned outward into control. My mother's dismissiveness was not indifference. It was its own form of panic, aimed in the wrong direction. The biopsy was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the space between, I went to work and came home and pressed the lump at night and read things online that I should not have read online, and then closed my laptop and told myself to wait for the facts. My father called me 8 days before the biopsy. He had heard from my mother that I'd gone back to the doctor. His voice was careful in the way it got when he was trying to sound reasonable while being unreasonable. "Your mother is worried about you," he said. "Not about the lump, about your mental state." "My mental state is fine?" "You're fixating." "Dad, the ultrasound showed a solid mass. The doctor referred me to a specialist. This is not fixation. This is following medical advice." A long pause. "We'd like you to see someone, a therapist, before you go any further with this." I put the phone down on my coffee table and sat back and looked at the ceiling. I picked it back up. "I'm going to the biopsy," I said. "I'm going with or without your support. I'm an adult. You can't cancel this one." He didn't respond to that. We talked for another 4 minutes about nothing, his golf game, the weather, and then we hung up, and I sat in the quiet of my apartment and understood, clearly and finally, that I was doing this alone. My sister drove up from Cincinnati the morning of the biopsy. She didn't ask. She just texted me the night before. "I'll be there at 8. "Don't argue." She sat in the waiting room for 2 hours with a coffee and a library book, and when I came out, she looked at my face and said, "How do you feel?" "Weird," I said. "Like something is about to change." She nodded and handed me the other coffee she had bought. We drove to a diner on Fifth Avenue and ordered eggs and didn't talk about it for a while. And that was exactly what I needed. The results took 9 days. I was at my desk on a Wednesday morning when Dr. Okafor's office called. I took the call in the stairwell because the office had thin walls and I did not want witnesses to whatever was about to happen to me. The mass was a papillary thyroid carcinoma. Early stage, localized. Highly treatable, Dr. Okafor said. One of the more favorable diagnoses in the spectrum of what it could have been, surgery. A thyroidectomy was the standard course of treatment followed by monitoring. She wanted to refer me to a head and neck surgeon at Ohio State's Medical Center. She said the word excellent prognosis twice. I sat down on a step in the stairwell. The fluorescent light above me buzzed. I thought about the bathroom at 6 a.m. I thought about my mother saying, "You've always been dramatic." I thought about the imaging appointment that had been canceled from a kitchen in Westerville. I said, "Okay." I said, "Thank you." I said, "What do I do next?" She told me. I wrote it down. I went back to my desk and sat there for the rest of the morning doing almost no work at all. I called my sister first, then I called my parents. My father answered. I told him plainly, papillary thyroid carcinoma, early stage, surgery scheduled. There was a silence on the other end of the line that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "That can't be right," he said. "It's right." Another silence. Then my mother's voice in the background asking what was happening. I heard my father's voice, low, saying something I couldn't hear. Then my mother came on the line. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me," I said. I had rehearsed this quietly in the stairwell. Not to comfort me, not to explain, just to listen. She listened. I told her about the 8 months, because by then it had been 8 months since I first found the lump, 8 months of being called dramatic, of having appointments canceled, of being offered chicken and reassurance instead of belief. I told her about Brenda, the patient advocate, about the emergency fund I had spent down, about my sister driving from Cincinnati because no one else had offered. I told her what Dr. Okafor had said sooner rather than later, and what might have happened if I had listened to them instead. By the end, my mother was crying. I had never heard her cry like that. Not controlled, not performative, the other kind. The kind that sounds like something breaking. "I thought we were protecting you," she said. "I know," I said. "That's the part that took me the longest to understand." The surgery was 6 weeks later at Ohio State. It went well. The surgeon removed the affected lobe of my thyroid, confirmed clear margins, and told me afterward that catching it at this stage made a significant difference in outcome. I spent one night in the hospital. My sister slept in the chair beside my bed. My parents drove up from Westerville the next morning and stood in the doorway of my room looking like people who had aged 10 years overnight. My father didn't say he was sorry. He's not built for that. But he sat beside my bed for 4 hours, and when he left, he squeezed my hand once, firmly, and that was its own kind of language. My mother apologized, more than once. Properly, without caveats. I accepted it because I had made peace with what they were. People shaped by fear, armored by certainty, undone by the thing that fear and certainty cannot ultimately survive, which is evidence. Recovery took 3 months. I was on thyroid hormone replacement medication, which I will take for the rest of my life. A small daily reminder, 1 pill, easy to carry. I went back to work part-time after 6 weeks and full-time after 10. I started seeing a therapist, which was, ironically, something my father had suggested, though not for the reasons he had originally meant. While I was recovering, I filed a formal complaint with the insurance provider regarding the unauthorized cancellation of my medical appointment. This took 4 months and involved documentation I had kept obsessively. The referral, the confirmation email from the imaging center, the cancellation notice, timestamps, phone logs. The outcome, the insurance provider found that the cancellation had been processed through my parents' account access on a plan I was listed on as a dependent, and that proper authorization protocols had not been followed on their end. I was awarded a partial reimbursement of out-of-pocket costs. It was not a large sum. It was not the point with the letter I kept, the one that said in formal, bureaucratic language what I already knew: the cancellation had been wrong. Someone else had interfered with my medical care. The record existed. I transferred off my parents' insurance plan the month I returned to full-time work. There is a woman at my office named Deja who found a lump in her armpit last spring. She mentioned it offhandedly in the break room in the same casual tone I had once used on a Sunday phone call. I put down my coffee cup and said, "Make the appointment today, not tomorrow." She looked at me for a second and I said, "I'm not being dramatic. Please make the appointment today." She did. It was benign. But she made the appointment and she had the information, and that was what mattered. I am not a doctor. I am not a medical professional of any kind. I am a 28-year-old woman in Columbus, Ohio, who works in property management and takes 1 small pill every morning and has a scar that runs along the left side of her collarbone that is faded, now, to a thin white line. But I have learned something that I would like to say plainly, because I think some of you in this room, in this comment section, wherever you are, already know it and are waiting for someone to say it out loud. No one knows your body better than you do. Not your parents, not your partner, not your employer, your insurance company, or anyone who benefits from your silence or your smallness. When something is wrong, the cost of being right is almost never as high as the cost of being dismissed. You are allowed to make the appointment. You are allowed to ask for the test. You are allowed to sit in the stairwell and write down every word your doctor says and then go back to your desk and feel completely overwhelmed and still show up the next day and do the next thing. You do not need permission. My mother calls me every Sunday. We talk about groceries, her garden, the weather in Westerville. Last month, she told me she had made her own doctor's appointment. A routine physical, the first one she'd had in years. She didn't make a big thing of it. Just mentioned it the way you mention a minor errand. But I noticed, some things change slowly. Some things change in ways that don't announce themselves. I have learned to watch for both. The scar is small. Smaller than I expected. On cold mornings when I'm getting dressed, I see it in the mirror, that thin white line, and I press 2 fingers to it gently, the way I once pressed 2 fingers to the lump that started all of this. It doesn't hurt. It's just there. Proof of something found and followed and handled. I got dressed. I went to work. I am still here. There's a version of this story where I listened to them, where I passed the chicken, got off the phone, closed the laptop, and trusted that the people who loved me knew better than the lump beneath my fingers. I have thought about that version often, not with bitterness, but with a kind of quiet recognition. That version ends differently. The mass grows quietly, past the stage where margins are clean and outcomes are favorable, into something harder and longer and less certain. That version exists, and the only thing standing between me and it was a decision I made alone in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon in March. What I understand now, on the other side of surgery and recovery and 1 small daily pill, is that action taken in the absence of certainty is not recklessness. It is the most honest form of self-respect available to us. I did not know what the lump was when I first pressed my fingers to it. My doctor did not know either, but we both agreed that not knowing was not the same as safe, and that the correct response to uncertainty about your own body is not silence. It is the next question, the next appointment, the next step forward into information. My parents were not wrong to love me. They were wrong about what love required. They had learned somewhere along the way that protection meant minimizing, that the kindest thing you could do for someone you cared about was to reduce the size of their fear until it disappeared. What they never accounted for was that some fears exist for a reason. Some fears are your body trying to tell you something true, and when the people around you work to quiet that signal, the problem does not go away. It simply continues without witnesses. That is the part that took me the longest to forgive. Not the dismissal itself, but the confidence behind it. The certainty that they knew my body better than I did, that their comfort with the idea of nothing being wrong was more reliable than my doctor's referral. Intelligence without humility is not wisdom. It is just stubbornness in a better suit. The willingness to say, I don't know, but let's find out. That is where actual intelligence lives, and it is rarer than most people think. What I carried through those 8 months was not courage in any grand sense. It was something smaller and more durable. The decision, made quietly and repeatedly, to do the next reasonable thing. Make the appointment. Keep the paperwork. Call the patient advocate. Transfer the money. Show up alone if you have to. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the continued movement forward while fear is present, one step at a time in the direction of truth. My sister drove from Cincinnati because I asked her to. Brenda, the patient advocate, handed me 3 pages of information because that was her job and she did it with care. Dr. O'Coffer said, sooner rather than later, because she was paying attention. None of them could do the thing that only I could do, which was to decide that what was happening inside my body mattered enough to pursue, regardless of what anyone else needed to believe. That decision, quiet, unglamorous, made in parking lots and stairwells, is the only reason I am here to tell this story. I hope it is useful to someone. I hope it finds whoever needs it.